have been in the same setting for some time. I don't know if you've noticed that, but the setting has not changed. It started out with Jesus in the temple, and then he left the temple, and then he found the man who was born blind, healed the man that was born blind, and they had the situation where they were brought before the Pharisees, and in that same setting, we start chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 1, he says, I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls the sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought them out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. You're going to find in John there's a whole big bunch of figures of speech, okay, where Jesus says, I am the light, right? Or I am the living water. These are figures of speech. We would call them analogies. Some way to understand something. Now, analogies are great when you're dealing at a very basic level. At some point, all analogies break down. Do you know that? There's no such thing as a perfect analogy. They break down. Jesus said, my sheep recognize my voice. He's going to get into the shepherd analogy, right? We like this analogy, the good shepherd, don't we? Yeah. Now, I'm going to ruin it for you. Right? Because the analogy is going to break down somewhere, right? What does a shepherd do? Well, he takes care of the sheep, and he makes sure that they're fed and they're watered and they're out of danger, and then he takes them to the market and he... Well, he sells them. Or he slaughters them and eats them himself. Or he shears them. Right? Do you see where the analogy breaks down? These are imperfect ways of explaining some spiritual truths. But Jesus is trying hard. And he's trying hard with some people who just do not want to see. We're talking about the Jewish religious leaders. Right? Do you remember the last thing that happened was the man was born blind? And Jesus sent him off, and he washed his eyes, and he came back seeing, and he didn't know who Jesus was because he'd never seen him before, right? And they had this big debate. Maybe he wasn't born blind, maybe the whole thing was a ruse. Maybe, are you sure this is the right man? What did he do? There's some way we've got to explain this. And Jesus found the man after they kicked him out. And he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He said, but I don't know who that is. Tell me who it is, and so I believe. He said, well, it's the one talking to you. Now, remember we mentioned before that the only thing about Jesus that would be familiar to this man was his voice. Right? Jesus picks up on this. He said, those who claim to see are blind. And the Pharisees said, well, are we blind too? He said, only if you claim that you can see. And then he talks about the sheep that follow him, the ones that recognize his voice. And he does something strange here. Because not just the shepherd part, he's going to talk about the sheep pen. Right? He's going to go on and say, I'm part of the sheep pen. Does that do anything for you? He said, well, here's the part of the sheep pen I am. I'm the gate. Does that do anything for you? Well, he just said, if someone doesn't come in through the gate, there's a problem. Right? If they don't come into the gate, they are robbers and thieves. If they don't come in through me, then they don't have the best intentions for the sheep, do they? Okay, let's see what he says. Verse 7. Therefore Jesus said again, I tell you the truth, I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thieves come only to steal and to kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. Okay. Here's a cool thing about the analogy of the gate. Do you come in and go out? That's what the gate did, right? Let the sheep in, let the sheep out. But Jesus said, everybody else are thieves and robbers. Who's he talking about? He's talking about the Jewish religious leaders that will not acknowledge that what he's doing is from God. Do you get that yet? Do you see how many different ways Jesus has come at this? And he's not going to let it go, guys. He said, they think that they're shepherds. They think that they have the best intentions of the sheep. Wow. Grow, little grass, grow. All the good things happening out there. Okay. They were supposed to be shepherds. We have shepherds here, right? We have elders here. Their job is to make sure that we grow spiritually, that we are fed spiritually, that we have what we need spiritually. Right? It is an imperfect analogy. You don't want to have one of them take a shearer to you. Right? No. You don't. And you actually probably don't want to get hooked by one either. I don't know, but okay. But the idea is there, and it is an old analogy. It goes way back in the Old Testament when God said that the shepherds aren't doing their job. The people aren't being taken care of spiritually. Well, how can they take care of the people spiritually if they don't even recognize what God is doing? That's what's going on in these 3 chapters, okay? He said, if they don't come through me to see the Father, if they don't acknowledge that God is working in me, they're out for some other kind of gain. They're in it for their own well-being. And then he's going to change the analogy. In verse 11 he said, instead of I am the gate, now he says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. He said, okay, we're not talking about a hired gun here. We're not talking about a hired hand. We're talking about someone who owns the sheep. Now, there's some parts of this analogy I don't like at all. I don't have this high opinion of sheep. I don't. I have a lot of respect for the little tiny lambs and trying to catch them, because we had that experience one time. Amy found one in a storm, brought it home, and we tried to take care of that little lamb, and it was a lot of work. That thing had springs for legs. Bing, bing. Okay, didn't want to go where you wanted it to go. Lived in our bathroom for a while. Okay, enough about that. I don't like being called a sheep. I don't know about you. Right? I mean, sheep will do some pretty dumb things. It's the shepherd's job to make sure that the sheep don't do dumb things or don't hurt themselves from doing dumb things, right? Well, I think that's a breakdown of the analogy. Our elders are not here watching after you to make sure you don't do dumb things. They're here to make sure that you are being fed spiritually.